So in this week's episode of Make It with Calvin, we're going to take some filler primer and a couple of other things and use it to make this Bachmann ON30 locomotive look a little bit better. Trust me, it'll look better. So the whole premise behind this was out of a failed episode idea called Pimp My Locomotive. As of now, it's kind of on hold. And the whole premise behind it was I was going to take one of my Bachmann locomotives and totally give it a whole new look. You know, maybe add some fuzzy dice inside, maybe add some strobe lights on the outside, you know, totally make the thing ballin'. But then I realized that's not very realistic, sadly. So I kind of scaled it back to let's make this locomotive a little more realistic. Now, as it stands, the locomotive itself is okay, but the problem is almost everybody runs them in the bone stock colors and paint configurations. And once you've seen like the 2 or 3 styles that they come in, you've seen them all. So drawing inspiration from the late Verne who did an amazing job of detailing his Porter locomotives from Bachmann, the same ones that I'm using, I've decided to give my own shot at making mine a little bit more unique. Now, what I've already done is I've taken the water tank and I've painted that a different color and weathered it some. Looks a lot better. And I've also done the same with the cab of it. And the technique that I used there to give it the wood effect on plastic is the same effect I'm using on here, because the front and rear out of order. Bumpers on here are cast white metal, and as they sit, they look horrid in black semi-glossy plastic, and there's just, you can't see any of the beautiful detail that Bachmann molded in there intentionally. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the filler primer and then some ink washes in a little bit, and we're actually going to make this stuff come out. So the first step is we're going to take our filler primer, just regular stuff. Personally, I would not recommend the high volume stuff, as we're actually not trying to fill these voids in. We're just trying to create a surface that the paint and the washes can grab onto. So the other technique is when I spray this, I'm going to be holding the can, and I'm not going to be spraying at the camera, don't worry. I'm going to be holding the can far away. I mean, I've got this thing literally like arm's length away. So that way the paint that hits it is extremely dry and goes on somewhat rough. I actually want that because I found the rougher the surface is, the better the ink takes it and the better it looks. So let's get started spray painting this little guy up. Okay, I'm going to say that's probably good for both sides, the front here and the back. The back got a little more primer and spots than the front, but you know what? That's fine. The main point is I'm just trying to create a good tacking surface for the ink to flow onto, because otherwise it's just not going to do anything. Also, having the neutral gray color underneath helps because that allows the ink and the details to show up better. So I'm going to let this guy sit for a while, maybe an hour or 2 minimum, because I want this to dry thoroughly before I go applying the ink washes. I'll explain why in a minute. Okay, so it's been a couple of hours, the paint's had time to dry, and now it's time to actually go ahead and stain everything. Now before we go any further, it should be noted that the inks that we are using are extremely good at staining things, both the good and the bad thing, so definitely keep that in mind. Work in an area that you have covered up very well, or you're going to make a very big mess very quickly. Now, the first color that we are going to use is brown. I promise it's in there. It's a little hard to see because it's at the bottom of the cup. And I took about 25 to 50 parts rubbing alcohol to 1 part India ink, brown, and I'm going to use that. It should be noted that you have to thin the ink a fair amount because it is extremely concentrated coming out of the bottle. For the black that's off camera, I think I thinned that down at least 100 to 1 or even more. For the black especially, you want it to be a very thin wash that you put on there, Nothing that's very strong, or it'll just mute out everything that you've done. You don't want that. So I'm going to try and move things a little closer here for the camera. Probably about there's the limited range. And I'm going to do my best to try and stain this without blocking the camera. And it's going to take multiple coats of this to actually begin to get the full-on effect for this. So I'm going to speed all this up. Okay, so I've let this sit for a while, and you'll notice that this definitely is a different color than when I started. So what I ended up doing is taking some straight brown ink, because I was not super thrilled with the speed at which I was getting the brown effect that I was after. I just took some straight ink and just kind of lightly brushed it on there, and it worked good. I don't entirely recommend doing that though, as if you're not careful, it can wick in there very quickly, but something you should probably experiment with a little bit. And in the worst case scenario, if you overdo it, you can just thin out what's there while it's still wet with some rubbing alcohol, and it should be fine. That said, I would not even consider doing that with the black though. It is way too dark. We're not trying to make black wood here again, not unless that's the effect you're after. You know, different strokes for different folks. So now this has had some time to sit, we can bring out the black and very, very carefully brush it on there. So I'm going to do my best to show you that again on camera, and then I'll do it on the other side. Oh, that is a thing of beauty right there. So let me just do the back side really fast. You can really do it however suits your fancy. I mean, at the end of the day, this is your personal model. You do it how you want, but already I can tell you that's looking way better than it did before. So hopefully you guys can see just how dramatic of a change there is. This is an 040 and this is the 042, but you can already see just how much more realistic this guy looks than that guy. So I hope this inspired you guys to at least try this method out. My closing tips would be: one, make sure that you're using, you know, filler primer. I found that it works better than just straight primer, especially on this material. This gives something for the ink to wick into, which is a really helpful thing. Really, really likes that. Also, before you prime things, it's a good idea to clean the surfaces off if possible. Just wipe them down with alcohol or something just to make sure that they're clean. Don't overdo the primer because you don't want to cover up the details that are there. And take your time when you're using the washes. Remember, you can always put more on there. It's kind of hard to take it off. And lastly, make sure when you're using the inks that you're doing it in a way that's not going to stain everything around you, because this stuff will stain if you're not careful. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you here next time on Make It with Calvin, where I might be pimping my loco some more. I got some more tricks up my sleeve.